Good evening and thank you for joining us at our Librarians World Series, coming to you live from the National Library. My name is Mervin and I will be your MC this evening. Known as the Meteorological Service Singapore, or MSS, this agency observes and studies Singapore's weather patterns. It also supplies weather information and climate services to the public as well as the aviation and maritime communities. Unknown to many, the practice of weather observation had a rather long history in Singapore, stretching back to the time when the British first arrived. This evening, Librarian Lim Tin Seng retraces the less explored part of our history, uncovering the earliest weather observations made on the island, the establishment of the first dedicated meteorological service during the colonial period, and the development of today's MSS. I shall now hand over the time to Tin Seng. Tin Seng, please.
Thank you, Mervin, for the very nice introduction, and hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this talk. So today I'm going to talk about, I'm going to trace the roots of our Met Service, or Meteorological Service, and in the process uncover the history of weather observation here. Now, to build the historical narratives, I will be using a whole range of materials from our collection. All right? So these include newspaper clippings, weather charts, lots of them, maps, and titles from our rare collections. It will be a very fun presentation, and I hope you will enjoy it and find it interesting. So without further ado, let us begin. Now, according to historical records, we appear to have started observing our weather here 200 years ago. So if you want, we can actually mark last year, the year 2020, as the 200th anniversary of the start of weather observation here. But you have to note that prior to 1862, Singapore's weather records are notoriously fragmented. Collected by many unofficial observers, the data is scattered throughout various publications, including books, journal articles, and newspapers. So if you are hoping for a very nice, beautifully recorded set of official weather figures, then I guess you'll be disappointed. But from the 1816 onwards, all right, things started to change and the recording of our weather became more consistent. That was mainly due to a number of factors, including the institutionalization of the practice of weather observation in 1862, the formation of the Malayan Met Service in 1929, and the establishment of our Singapore Met Service in 1965. But before I go any deeper, let us go back to where it all began. Now, it is widely considered that Singapore's first weather observation was made by William Farquhar. I don't think I need to introduce who he is, but well, he was the first resident of Singapore, right? And between 1820 to 1823, he observed and recorded the monthly average temperature and number of rainy days here using basic tools, including a thermometer and a barometer in a thatched bungalow. Now, earlier, he had also made similar observations in Malacca in 1809, and he left Singapore. After he left Singapore in 1823, he will reproduce his observations in the 1827 issue of the periodical Transactions of the Royal Asiatic Society of Great Britain and Ireland. Now, this table is one of his weather tables, and it was reproduced in the periodical I mentioned earlier. Signed by William Farquhar himself, as shown in the red box down there. It shows an overview of Singapore's weather for the year 1822. And the various weather data that he captured are highlighted in different color boxes. All right. In the orange box, we have monthly temperature taken at different times of the day. This includes the average temperature as well as the greatest and least range, which I believe could be the maximum and minimum temperature. All right, so in the green box, we have the number of rainy days and dry days. But unfortunately, the amount of rainfall was not recorded. All right, so and finally, in the blue box, what it highlights is the monthly atmospheric pressure taken by a barometer. So what's the use? From my understanding, it is used to find out when the weather is going to change. Here we have another weather table by Farquhar, and that was reproduced in the Transactions of the Royal Asiatic Society. All right, this time it shows Malacca's weather for the year 1809. And the data capture is pretty similar to the Singapore one, as it includes the monthly temperature, including the average as well as the greatest and least range as shown in the orange box, and the number of rainy days and fair days as highlighted in the green box. Now, what is missing are the atmospheric pressure readings. Okay, so after William Farquhar left Singapore in 1823, the practice of weather observations appeared to have continued for another 2 years before it ceased. Right, this is according to John Crawford, who mentioned this in his 1828 publication, Journey of an Embassy. Of course, the title is longer than that, but okay, Journey of an Embassy. And in the book, he reproduced this table showing Singapore's weather for the year 1825. Now, the data capture is pretty similar to Farquhar's tables that we have seen in the previous slides. It has average monthly temperature, including the monthly average, as well as the greatest and least range, as shown in the orange box, and the number of rainy and dry days, as shown in the green box. Very interesting is that John Crawford, who, by the way, was the second resident of Singapore, did not mention in his book that Farquhar was the first person to record Singapore's weather. Yeah, he gave this honor to Captain Davis. So anyway, after 1825, Singapore did not appear to have any known weather records until the newspaper, the Singapore Free Press, and Mercantile Advertiser started publishing the island's rainfall and temperature from October 1835. Now, this data series was groundbreaking, okay, in my opinion, as it was possibly the first time the amount of rainfall was provided. Okay, further, it contains additional weather information, all right, including the prevailing wind direction, and sometimes a simple overview of the weather condition based on the reported data. Now, this table here shows how the Free Press weather table looks like. Okay, published in the 11 January 1838 issue of the newspaper, the table laid out the island's weather for the year 1837. Data in the orange box shows the monthly average as well as the maximum and minimum temperature of the island taken at different times of the day. The green and blue boxes, on the other hand, show the prevailing wind direction and the amount of rain taken in inches, respectively. Now, the Singapore Free Press and Mercantile Advertiser would continue to report and publish our weather until January 1838. So it actually stopped doing that. Now, after the Free Press stopped reporting it, it seems that there wasn't any weather data until November 1839. At least to my knowledge, because I have not found any published weather records from that period. All right. Anyway, from November 1839, the practice of weather observation was resumed after it was picked up by American missionary Joseph S. Traveling. So between November 1839 to February 1841, he observed and recorded the island's weather at the mission school of the American Board of Foreign Missions at Ryan's Hill, which is today's Bukit Pasoh. Now, the findings, which is shown here and published in the 1843 issue of the American Journal of Arts and Science, contain different types of weather information. These include the monthly average temperature, as well as the highs and the lows, all right, and rainfall, like the amount of rain and number of rainy days. Okay, these are all highlighted in the orange and green boxes, respectively. There are also some other interesting data, such as evaporation level, the hours of sunshine, and even peals of thunder, as shown in the blue box. Can you imagine he actually counted that? Yeah. So using what he found, Traveley did a brief analysis of our weather, commenting it as exceedingly pleasant, quote unquote. He also wrote that the frequent rains that the island received were not only able to free it in a great measure from the heat of most tropical countries, quote unquote, and provide the happiest effect on vegetation, keeping it constantly fresh and green, quote unquote. Now, as Trevelyan was collecting his data, Second Lieutenant Charles Morgan Elliot of the Madras Engineers was sent to Singapore in September 1840 to establish a magnetic observatory as part of a larger magnetic survey exercise of the Indian archipelago commissioned by the Royal Society. Okay, so Elliot used his observatory to collect weather information, including temperature and rainfall. As a result, this provided us with yet another set of weather data. So Elliot spent 4.5 years here in Singapore, and the data he collected from January 1841 to September 1845 was later reproduced in his report and a 1848 Journal of the Indian Archipelago and Eastern Asia article by Dr. Robert Litter. Now, what I've shown here is the table from Dr. Litter's article, and it shows the amount of rainfall that Singapore received from January 1841 to September 1845 as recorded by Elliot. Now, by the way, if you are interested, Elliot's observatory was located along Kallang River as captured in this 1849 map. Also, from historical records, it was said that his observatory was made of wood and granite with an attached roof. Now, after Elliot's data was published, there was a gap of nearly 20 years before the Magistrate of Police, Jonas Daniel Vaughan, who was also a science person, right, resumed the practice of observing Singapore's weather in 1862. Now, to capture the island's monthly rainfall and temperature, Vaughan used a self-reading thermometer and a rain gauge. His observations, which covered the period from 1862 to 1866, were published in the Government Gazette, thereby making the first time the island's weather data was recorded in an official government publication. And the table here shows the data he captured. Okay, they include the atmospheric pressure, as shown in the orange box, daily temperature, including average, as well as the highest and lowest, as shown in the green box, the amount of rainfall is shown in the blue box, and some remarks on the weather, mostly on cloud formation and the prevailing wind direction, as shown in the yellow box. Okay, so by the way, this is our weather in 1864. All right, there's also indication on the top in the red box that states all these data were registered at River Valley Road at 50 feet above sea level. Now, in 1869, all right, the practice of weather observation here hit a milestone when it was institutionalized. And the colonial government department that undertook this responsibility was, surprise, surprise, the medical department of the Straits Settlements. The reason behind this was simple. It was because health authorities then saw the link between the weather and outbreak of diseases such as cholera and smallpox. And this link, as you can see from the quotation that I provided in the slides, and was given by Principal Civil Medical Officer of the Straits Settlements of the time, H.L. Randall, who wrote in his 1873 four-year review of the medical department's weather observation that the outbreak of smallpox in 1872 and cholera in 1873 was to a great extent caused by the amount of rainfall the island received. Basically, it was a dry season, so it actually caused all this outbreak. Now, the weather data that the medical department captured was published in the Government Gazette. But for rainfall records, it is good to take note that the department actually compiled readings taken by a number of different registration stations. All right, okay, so they are mostly located in hospitals, including the Convict Jail Hospital at Bras Basah, KK Hospital, and the General Hospital. Now, some of them were in the estates and premises of private individuals, as shown here in this table, highlighted by the color boxes. Okay, so for example, in the orange box, we have readings for the year 1871, 1872, and 1873 in the Perseverance Estate in Geylang, and another set for the years 1872 and 1873, which are in the green box taken in Mount Pleasant. Now, this table also shows the number of rainfall registration stations, and it actually grew from only one in 1869 to 5 by the end of 1873. So over the subsequent decades, the number of rainfall registration stations will continue to grow. And by the end of 1901, as seen in this table here, there were a total of 11 registration stations in Singapore. Now, these are highlighted in the orange box. There were also another 30 in the remaining Straits Settlements territories, as shown in the green box. In Singapore, these stations were spread mostly at the southern as well as the central part of the island, in locations such as the main hospitals, so we're talking about KK, the General Hospital, as well as places such as the Botanic Gardens and the Waterworks Reservoir, which is today's MacRitchie Reservoir. As for the rest of the weather data, as I mentioned a couple of slides ago, they were published in the Government Gazette, and it comprises a whole range of weather information such as temperature, rainfall, direction of wind, evaporation level, relative humidity, vapor tension, and cloud formation. Now, all these data are highlighted here in these different color boxes. And since it was published in the Government Gazette, you can actually drop by the library, come over here and view it. Okay, except that you have to view it using the microfilm, because these are from the rare book collection. Anyway, the medical department will continue to observe and record Singapore's and the rest of the Straits Settlements weather until 1927. This allowed the production of an unbroken series of weather records that stretches from 1869 to the end of 1926. From 1927, the responsibility of weather observation was transferred to the Survey Department, okay, in preparation for the creation of a dedicated meteorological branch. Now, this new branch, which was formally set up in 1929 as the Malayan Meteorological Service, or the MMS, was to observe the weather of both the Straits Settlements, including Singapore and Malaya. Now, the idea to create the MMS was mooted by then Chief Secretary for the Federated Malay States, George Maxwell, and then Director of the Federated Malay States Museums, Herbert Robinsons. And the aim was to provide, was to actually improve the quality of meteorological services in the Straits Settlements and Malaya, so that more complex weather information such as weather forecasts and daily reports could be supplied to the aviation sector, which was at its infancy stage, but growing at the time. Now, to establish this branch, one of the first steps taken was to create full-scale, or they call it first-order observation stations throughout Malaya and Singapore. Now, these stations, unlike the previous ones, were staffed by full-time observers who were trained in the field of meteorology. They were also equipped with instruments that were capable to read all sorts of weather information. Okay, these include temperature, the average, and as well as the highs and the lows, humidity, the amount, intensity, and duration of rain, cloud types, and their direction of movement, amount of sunshine, wind direction, wind velocity, atmospheric pressure, horizontal and vertical visibility, rate of evaporation, and duration and intensity of thunderstorms. All this information were published by the MMS in their two main statistical periodicals. The summary of observations, which I have it here, over here. You can access it here in the library. And the upper air data. There's another one here. Also, you can access it in the library. All right. The table you see up there in the slide is a sample of how their weather table looks like. It is taken from the summary of observations, and it shows the readings taken at the Paya Lebar Airport, also called Singapore Airport, in 1956, or back then. Oh, by the way, this is just one table showing temperature and wind velocity taken at Paya Lebar Airport, there are actually a few more others containing other sorts of weather information, including rainfall. So in the periodical, there are also similar tables showing records taken by other observation stations in Malaya. Anyway, all this data were necessary for the MMS, especially now that they had to study the climate of Malaya and Singapore in a more scientific and systematic manner so that they could conduct forecast work or draw synoptic charts or weather maps for not only planes but ships. Now, the MMS will continue to grow throughout the decades, and by 1940, it was managing 17 first order and 30 smaller auxiliary stations in Singapore and Malaya. It was also considered one of the best, quote unquote, Met service in the region, and was sharing its weather information with Met officers in the Dutch East Indies, today's Indonesia, French Indochina, today's Vietnam, Siam, Thailand today, Hong Kong, the Philippines, and India. So when the war broke out in the region, the MMS played an important role by providing weather information to the British Army. All right? And after Singapore fell to the Japanese, it was actually instructed by the Japanese to continue its work. However, the records that were collected during the Japanese occupation were destroyed by the Japanese after they surrendered. Yeah, this is what MMS said in their annual reports. As the Japanese also destroyed almost all their equipment and instruments, the MMS was only able to resume operation in 1947. Okay, so during this post-war period, the MMS also ceased to be part of the survey department. Rather, it functioned as a separate government department that served both Singapore and the Federation of Malaya. Its headquarters, however, was still based in Singapore. Under this arrangement, the MMS rebuilt itself, regained what they have lost, and then they continue to supply weather information and services to the general public, the press, civil aviation, merchant shippings, and Met officers in the region. To improve how it observed the weather, it also undertook a number of initiatives and upgrading. For example, in 1951, it installed the first weather radar sets in Singapore, Kuala Lumpur, and Kota Baru to track the development and movement of thunderstorms. This was followed by the establishment of an upper air observatory in Paya Lebar in 1952. Now, during that time, they also started to recruit merchant ships as weather observation stations, equipping them with instruments so that they could capture the weather in the Straits of Malacca and South China Sea. So how the MMS developed after it was established in 1929 was actually very interesting and fascinating. If you'd like to find out more about the MMS and what it did, you can actually look through their annual reports, which I have it here as well. Okay, they are all in the library. But just to let you know that during the pre-war period, their annual reports were part of the Survey Department's annual report. I have it here. All right. You cannot see this is just the cover over here. And it was only after the war that the MMS started publishing their own annual reports, as shown here. Okay. Now, in some of the annual reports, you can find the usual year in review and other types of information like location of observation stations and interesting maps like Singapore's flight information region map, like I put it up there. And a pictorial representation of flight forecasts from Singapore to Darwin. Again, I put it up there. You can see it in the slide. Yep. So moving on, after Singapore left Malaysia to become an independent country in 1965, the Singapore section of the MMS was actually transferred to the Deputy Prime Minister office. It was then moved to the Ministry of Communications after it was set up in 1968. Today, I think you should all know that it is now part of the National Environment Agency. Now, during this post-independence period, the Meteorological Service Singapore, or the MSS, would go through many development and transformation to enhance its ability to observe our weather better. For instance, in 1970, I replaced our our storm warning radar at Paya Lebar Airport, with one that could locate storms up to 400 kilometers away. Okay, it also can provide a more detailed picture of the distribution of rain areas during a storm. In 1971, it added a second wind radar at the Upper Air Observatory and opened a new ground station at its headquarters to receive up-to-date satellite meteorological images of Southeast Asia. And in 1977, the MSS also started recruiting more ships as mobile weather observation stations, so it could supply more accurate weather bulletins, including warnings of rough seas and strong winds to ships. Perhaps one of the most important development or key development during the nation building years was the introduction of a computerization program that was during the 80s. All right. Now, this program introduced the use of computers to replace labor-intensive work, such as compiling meteorological data, preparing and updating weather charts, and forecasting. All these tasks were very tedious. Okay, I put out a code up there. You can see how bad it is. And in fact, it could take many, many hours, about, 8 hours. That's what was reported in the newspaper. To complete. But with the usage of computers, they were reduced to minutes. So pretty impressive. Now, even after the introduction of computers, the MSS did not stop upgrading its capabilities. For example, in the 1990s, they installed a lightning detection system, established a national seismic system to track earthquakes, and put up a new Doppler weather radar that will give them the ability to better analyze the structure of storms, as well as to monitor the development and movement of weather system in the region. In the area of disseminating weather information to its users, the MSS also tapped on prevailing communication technologies. For example, after the teletext, if you guys remember teletext, anyway, it's a television information retrieval system that was launched in 1983, but discontinued, in 2013. The MSS made their weather information available there on the platform, all right? And then in 1984, introduced the Dial Weather Forecast Service. Now, this service was a 24-hour telephone line that the public can call in to obtain weather information, such as 12-hour forecast of the weather, tide times, and the expected highest and lowest temperatures of the day. In 1995, the MSS made another giant step by launching its own website. All these things you can see, I put it up in the slide. Now, on the website, okay, users could gain access to information such as an overview of the weather, the fortnightly outlook, lightning information, weather forecast for the Asia-Pacific countries, and weather satellite pictures of Southeast Asia, the Southeast Asian region. Now today, other than the MSS's website, we have two mobile apps that serve this function. Okay, it's My Environment, or MyENV, and Weather at SG. Both apps allow the public to use their mobile phones to access weather and forecasting information. And there's lots of other things you can do, such as island-wide observations of rainfall temperature, humidity, wind direction, and location-specific 2-hour forecast. So it's a very useful app. Now, if you're interested to find out where you can obtain the weather data that the MSS has compiled since 1965, you can do so by using these sources. All these things you can actually access here or through the internet. Okay, so what are they? They are the periodical summary observations, again, over here. It covers the period from 1965 to the late 1990s, at least in our collection. Annual climatological report from its website, which covers the period from 2014 to the present. Okay, although the latest copy is 2018, and the ultimate one, okay, data.gov.sg. Now this one is covered the period from 1981 to the present, and you can download the data too. So it's very, very useful. Now, with all this data, all right, it kind of provides you a whole range of information, including total rainfall, number of rain days, monthly average temperature, monthly maximum and minimum temperature, relative humidity, wind speed, and whatnot. All right, so it's pretty comprehensive. Now, with all this valuable data collected by not only the MSS, but the MMS and the medical department of the Straits Settlements, we can actually construct this graph, which shows the amount of annual rainfall and mean temperature of Singapore from 1869 to 2020. Now, I have to emphasize that the values for both rainfall and mean temperature I took to construct this graph are based on those recorded by the main observation stations, and it changes over over a period of time. Okay, for example, from 1869 to 1828, the station was KK Hospital. From 1929 to 1933, it was Mount Faber. Then from 1934 to 1954, we have Kallang Airport. And then from 1955 to 1980, it was Paya Lebar Airport. Finally, from 1981 to the present, it is today's Changi's Climate Station. So all these different stations, and it's only based on one station, I wouldn't say that this is a very scientifically accurate graph, but it does give you a trend. Okay, so for example, if you look at the graph, you can use the trend line to see where our rainfall and temperature are heading. I have said to say that the amount of rainfall we receive each year, which is represented by the blue blue bars, is actually decreasing. So you see the trend line is going down, while our temperature is increasing and quite steeply. And this is actually quite profound, especially in the last decade. And by the way, this for you to take note is that the values on the x-axis is set at an interval of 2. Hence, you can't see the year 2020, but it's there, okay? The amount of total rainfall and mean temperature recorded by the Changi Climate Station last year are shown in this graph. Okay, let me circle it for you. Now, despite experiencing a very wet and cold end to the year 2020, I have to say that it was not the wettest nor the coldest year we experienced. According to the MSS's latest year in review, which you can obtain it from their website, the annual rainfall recorded at the Changi Climate Station was 1,886.6 millimeter, which is actually the 8th lowest over the past 30 years. Further, the annual mean temperature was 28 degrees Celsius, which is the 8th warmest year on record. However, there were more frequent intense heavy rain events over the island. All right. In fact, there were 6 days of very heavy rainfall, where the hourly total rainfall exceeded 70 millimeters. Yep. Now, this is the highest number of days since 2013. All this could be caused by the La Nina effect taking place in the ocean, Pacific Ocean right now. From what I read, I think it's at its peak now, and it should end soon. So enjoy the nice weather and hope that hope that El Nino will not form after that, all right? So with that, I shall end my talk and hope you find it interesting.